Have you ever wondered what happens when the person who has carried everyone else's pain for so long finally stops? What happens when the one who always forgives, always yields, always sacrifices, suddenly chooses silence? When they stop explaining themselves to those who refuse to understand, when they withdraw their endless compassion from those who only consume it. This is not the moment the empath becomes cruel. This is the moment they become whole. Carl Jung once said something that cuts to the heart of this transformation. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. For years, maybe decades, you've lived only in your light. You've identified with kindness, forgiveness, endless patience. But there's another half of you that's been waiting in the shadows. And when that shadow finally rises, everything changes. Before we dive deeper, if this resonates with your soul's journey, please hit that like button and subscribe for more transformational content. Your support helps this message reach other souls who need to hear it. Picture this moment. The narcissist expects your familiar response, the tears, the explanations, the desperate attempts to restore peace. But instead, they're met with something they've never seen from you before. Silence. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence of power. Not withdrawal born of fear, but withdrawal born of wisdom. Not the absence of love, but love with boundaries. And in that moment, their entire world begins to collapse. To understand why something as simple as silence can shatter a narcissist's control, we need to dive deeper into what Jung called the compensation principle. When any part of our personality becomes too one-sided, the unconscious will rise to restore balance. The Carl Jung empath dynamic reveals how this plays out in the most painful relationships. You see, the empath hasn't been weak. They've been incomplete, living only in half their power, giving from only half their being. The other half, the part that sets boundaries, that says no, that protects the sacred space of the self, has been buried in shame, labeled as selfish or cruel. But that buried strength is not your enemy. It's your salvation. For too long, society has painted the empath as an eternal flame that never goes out. The light bearer, the healer, the one who lifts others when they fall, softens rage with gentle words, becomes an anchor for those drowning in despair. On the surface, this image radiates nobility. It promises safety, kindness, unconditional love. But here's what nobody talks about: this role is a prison disguised as a palace. When you live only as the savior, you learn to treat others' pain as more important than your own needs. You forgive even while your wounds still bleed, believing that your suffering is somehow necessary for love to exist. You bend yourself into impossible shapes just to ensure others feel comfortable crossing your own boundaries until you can no longer remember where you end and they begin. Jung warned us about this trap. He called it one-sidedness, when the ego becomes so identified with certain qualities that it pushes the opposing traits into the shadow. You identify completely with compassion, patience, self-sacrifice. Meanwhile, anger, the need for rest, the right to say no, the longing for freedom, all these get branded as selfish, cruel, unworthy. And so they get buried alive. But the psyche has its own intelligence. When light is pulled too far in one direction, darkness will rise to restore balance. This is not punishment, it's physics. Jung understood that light that is not balanced by its opposite becomes a fire that consumes the torchbearer. The empath becomes living proof of this principle. Endless kindness, limitless endurance, boundless compassion, all eventually turn into a hidden fire, burning them from within. Now imagine someone skilled at exploiting this imbalance. The narcissist arrives like a heat-seeking missile, locking onto the empath's one-sidedness. They don't see a whole person. They see an unlimited resource. Someone who believes love means endurance. Someone who thinks unconditional forgiveness is the highest virtue. Someone who feels guilty anytime they dare to think of themselves. In this maze of distorted love, the narcissist easily transforms compassion into chains. But here's the crucial truth that changes everything. The empath is not imprisoned by the narcissist. They are imprisoned by their own one-sidedness. The narcissist merely exploits the void, taking the strength the empath voluntarily abandoned. This is why personal development must include shadow work. Without it, we remain fragmented, vulnerable to those who would use our incomplete development against us. The pattern repeats endlessly. The narcissist provokes knowing the empath will react with explanation, justification, desperate attempts to restore harmony. They withdraw affection, knowing the empath will chase, will bend, will sacrifice more of themselves to regain approval. They distort reality, knowing the empath will twist themselves into knots, trying to make sense of the chaos. It's a pre-programmed dance, and both dancers know their steps by heart. Until the day the music stops. The first crack appears when the empath's body rebels. Maybe it's a breakdown, a bout of depression, a relationship that collapses without apparent reason. These aren't punishments from the outside. They're calls from within, from the part of themselves they abandoned. This is the shadow knocking, demanding to be heard. Jung taught us that the psyche consists of two halves that together form a whole. The empath has been living with only one half, the half of light. But light without darkness becomes a consuming fire. Endless giving without receiving becomes a betrayal of the self. Unconditional tolerance becomes permission for invasion of the soul's sacred territory. The shadow contains everything the empath rejected: healthy anger, the energy that guards boundaries; the desire for rest, the body's basic need; the voice that says no, the minimal declaration of freedom. But for years, these were branded as selfish, cruel, unworthy, and pushed deep into the unconscious. Then comes the day when the body collapses, when the soul fractures, when relationships fall apart. The rejected part begins to knock. It might come in dreams, where you finally scream enough into the narcissist's face. It might come in depression, when your body forces you to lie down, unable to hold anyone else. It might come in a moment of piercing clarity when you look in the mirror and realize, I have lost myself entirely. This is compensation. The unconscious sending signals to pull the ego back into balance. When the shadow rises, the empath must learn new movements. The one accustomed to bowing must lift their head. The one accustomed to endless smiling must grow stern. The one accustomed to automatic yes must discover no. At first, this looks like personality reversal. The gentle one suddenly appears firm. The tolerant one suddenly sets boundaries. The patient one suddenly withdraws. But look closer. This isn't distortion. This is return. Return to what was abandoned. Return to the other half of the soul. The narcissist feels this shift immediately. Their entire power game was built on one assumption: that you will always respond according to the old pattern. They attack, you cry. They distort truth, you rush to defend. They withdraw, you chase. But when your shadow is named, the dance breaks. Now you choose silence. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of power. You choose withdrawal. Not withdrawal as abandonment, but withdrawal as self-care. You choose to say no. And that no strikes like a hammer against their castle of illusions. For the narcissist, these actions feel like cosmic betrayal. They spiral into panic, like an actor watching the stage lights go dark, the audience leaving. No more reactions, no more supply, no more applause. In that emptiness, they're forced to hear their own echo, the very thing they feared most. But here's the deeper truth: you don't become cruel. You become whole. This is what Jung called the activation of the transcendent function. When two opposing poles are held long enough, a third thing emerges. You no longer live in either-or patterns, either loving or strong. You begin to live both and loving and strong. Carl Jung empath integration means refusing the split between light and dark, instead allowing both to inform your responses. This is individuation, when light and shadow join hands to form a complete human being. When the shadow rises, three powerful tools return to your conscious awareness. These are not weapons of attack. They are instruments of protection, sovereignty, and truth. First, silence. The end of the reactive dance. In the narcissist's hands, silence is an invisible whip, leaving victims anxious and endlessly guessing what they did wrong. In your mature hands, silence becomes declaration, "I will not play this game." When they distort truth and cloud the air with accusations, you no longer scramble to argue for justice. You fall silent. That silence cuts off the familiar dance, the dance in which they exist only through your reaction. This silence is not punishment. It's a psychological container holding the tension of opposites without rushing to resolve it. Within that container, new wisdom emerges. You learn to bear contradiction without fixing it, creating space for truth to settle naturally. Second, withdrawal. The act of supreme self-care. In their hands, withdrawal is a lever of control, turning absence into a knife that provokes panic and pursuit. In your hands, withdrawal becomes kindness toward yourself. It's pause that frees your nervous system from constant alarm. It's space for your body to recover, for your breath to return to its natural rhythm. At its deepest level, withdrawal creates inner space, so your ego can reconnect with its center. Stepping out of the drama spiral, you listen to your body. The heartbeat, the knot in your stomach, the tension in your shoulders. From that listening, you reclaim your authority. You no longer react to their rhythm, but live by your own. This is not abandonment. This is the minimum requirement of a healthy soul, the right to private space. Third, no. The thunderclap that shatters illusion. Perhaps no word haunts the narcissist more than no. Their entire world depends on consent concessions compliance. Every time you nod, every cost you accept, builds another brick in their false throne. When you utter firm no, the structure collapses. This no is not indifference, not hatred. It's the symbol of psychological sovereignty. It says, "This part belongs to me, and I will not allow trespassing." It draws the boundary between me and you, between love and depletion. For them, that no is a death sentence for their illusion of control. When these three forces, silence, withdrawal, no, appear together, they strike like hammers against the foundation of the narcissist's castle. They spiral into panic like an addict deprived of supply. They may scream, play, victim search for new sources. But deep down, they know the truth: they've lost their central power source. Your reaction. Jung once said, "What is repressed becomes fate." You repressed your strength too long, and it became tragic fate in their hands. But once you name that hidden shadow, fate rewrites itself. You're no longer puppet in their script, but author of your own life. If their life is theater, your silence, withdrawal, and no are the moment the stage lights go out. The cruelest thing for them is not being hated. It's being ignored. Their spotlight never came from within. It always came from others' reactions. When the audience leaves, they must face raw truth. Without watchers, they are nobody. Here we must address the crucial distinction that separates conscious boundary setting from manipulation. Both the narcissist and the mature empath might use silence, both might withdraw, both might say no. But the inner compass pointing toward intention makes all the difference between exploitation and restoration. The narcissist uses silence to punish, to starve attention, to force submission through anxiety. You use silence to protect peace, to end reactive cycles, to create space for nervous systems to recover. They use withdrawal to avoid responsibility, to manipulate through abandonment fears. You use withdrawal to rebuild boundaries, to safeguard minimum psychological safety. They say no to punish, to dominate, to prove their power over others. You say no to define sovereignty, what belongs to you and what does not. Intention reveals itself through your body's response. When guided by healthy intent, your shoulders relax, your heartbeat steadies, your sleep becomes unbroken. Your language shifts from "you must" to "I choose, I will, I do not agree." When driven by manipulative intent, your body tightens. You become restless, anxious, obsessed with how they'll react. Your words slip into commands, ultimatums, prolonged silences designed to teach lessons. Intent also reveals itself across time. Manipulation is always short-term. It hooks a reaction, then shifts shape. It works momentarily, but leaves emptiness demanding stronger doses. Restoration is steady, consistent. It honors process, repeats boundaries through action rather than threats, accepts loss as the price of health. The test of intent is this question: if they never change, would I still hold this choice? If yes, you stand on grounds of inner order. If not, you may be using boundaries as levers of power. Personal development requires this level of honest self-examination. Without it, we risk becoming what we once suffered under, using pain to justify causing pain. When your intent is restoration rather than retaliation, something beautiful happens. Tactics once used for control become tools of liberation. Silence cuts strings of reactivity, handing back ownership of feelings to you. Withdrawal opens space for clarity and self-care. No shatters illusions built on endless submission. This is Jung's alchemy in action. Raw material passing through fires of consciousness to crystallize into new quality. No longer naive light that burns its bearer, but solid light, weighted by shadows counterbalance. This is individuation's logic. Opposites cease warring and begin connecting in higher form. When you hold tension of opposites, love and stop, give and keep, open and close. The transcendent function activates, birthing a third way. No longer either or, but both and. You step out of the drama triangle completely. No longer sacrificing to feel valuable, no longer retaliating to feel strong. You stand at center, calm, bounded, sovereign. Love itself transforms, warm, but not clinging, deep, but not drowning, intimate, yet breathing with space. Liberation arrives quietly, almost like whisper, yet its power reshapes everything. For you, liberation is not about conquering them or proving them wrong. It's about stepping out of the cycle entirely. It's about no longer needing to explain, justify, or fight. It's about reclaiming what was always yours, freedom to live as whole sovereign being. What looks from outside like using their tactics is actually you finally learning to honor yourself. Silence becomes choice, born of strength rather than reaction born of fear. Detachment becomes clear seeing of what belongs to you and what doesn't, rather than shield of numbness. Refusal becomes simple recognition of self-worth rather than defiance. These actions, once foreign, become natural as you embody new reality. For too long, you believed love means sacrifice, compassion means endless forgiveness, kindness means tolerating cruelty. But when liberation begins, these illusions fall away. You see that love, including the self, is the only real love. Anything less is not love at all. In this new state, you no longer feel chained to others' moods and manipulations. You no longer wake bracing for chaos they might bring. Instead, you rise with peace, not dependent on anyone else. Your energy is yours. Your choices are yours. Your life is yours. This is liberation's feeling, not grand rebellion, but calm, steady truth. They cannot follow you into this new place. They may try pulling you back into old arguments, old traps, old cycles of guilt and control. But you no longer respond as before. No more endless explaining, no more bending, no more rescuing. Simply quiet strength that cannot be moved. Faced with this unshakable presence, they realize the old game is over. Without reaction, they have no power. Without access, they have no control. This liberation doesn't make you cold or closed. It makes you more open than ever, but with discernment. You still love deeply, but wisely. You still give, but where it's received with respect. You still feel deeply, but no longer drown in others' feelings. Your compassion becomes more powerful because it's no longer scattered everywhere. It's intentional, focused, strong. You learn to live in balance. No longer only the healer carrying others' pain, but also the protector, guarding your soul's sacredness. You no longer split yourself between light and shadow, but allow both to exist within creating wholeness. In this wholeness, you discover something extraordinary. You're no longer afraid, no longer waiting for validation, no longer seeking approval. You're complete in yourself. This freedom ripples into every life area. Relationships shift because you no longer attract those who only take. New connections appear rooted in respect and mutual growth. Opportunities arise because you no longer hide to keep others comfortable. Your presence changes because you carry calm authority that cannot be shaken. The world feels different because you are different. Liberation brings peace with the past. You no longer look back with bitterness or regret. You see lessons, growth, strength discovered in experiences fire. You understand that what felt like suffering was the very path leading to awakening. You no longer need to hate them or resent what happened. You can release it all because you're no longer bound to it. This transformation represents Carl Jung empath integration at its deepest level. Not about mastering their tactics to win invisible wars, but learning deeper truth. You were never weak, never powerless, never broken. You were simply learning to balance extraordinary capacity for love with equally necessary capacity for protection. Once that balance is found, you become unstoppable. Liberation is realizing you don't need saving because you learn to save yourself. You don't need validation because you validate your own worth. You don't need control because you are free. This is when you step fully into your own life, no longer defined by past wounds, no longer held captive by manipulation cycles, no longer living in another's shadow. You are whole, sovereign, and free. Your healing becomes beacon for others, still trapped in cycles of giving, without receiving, loving, without boundaries, sacrificing, without wisdom. When you rise in your power, you inspire another to rise with you. This is the gift of true personal development. Not just healing yourself, but lighting the way for others to find their own wholeness. Your integration becomes invitation for collective healing. Your sovereignty becomes permission for others to reclaim theirs. The empath's journey from fragmentation to wholeness is ultimately humanity's journey. Learning to love with wisdom, to give with boundaries, to shine our light while honoring our shadow. When we embody this integration, we don't just change our own lives, we change the world. Remember, every time you choose wholeness over people-pleasing, every time you honor your boundaries, every time you love yourself enough to say no to what depletes you, you're not just healing, you're teaching. You're showing others what's possible when we dare to become complete. Your healing matters. Your boundaries matter. Your wholeness matters. And in claiming that wholeness, you give others permission to claim theirs. This is how we transform not just relationships, but the very fabric of how human beings connect with one another. One healed heart, one integrated shadow, one sovereign soul at a time. To truly grasp this transformation, we must venture deeper into the psychological mechanics at play. Jung's analytical psychology reveals that what appears as interpersonal conflict is often an external manifestation of internal fragmentation. The empath-narcissist dynamic becomes a theater where unconscious parts of the psyche play out their ancient drama. The empath carries what Jung called the wounded healer archetype, someone whose sensitivity to pain, both their own and others, becomes both their gift and their curse. But when this archetype operates without conscious integration, it creates what depth psychology recognizes as a savior complex. The empath becomes addicted to rescuing others, not purely from altruism, but because saving others temporarily fills the void left by abandoning themselves. Meanwhile, the narcissist embodies the eternal child archetype, someone who never learned to self-regulate emotionally, and thus requires constant external validation to maintain psychological stability. They unconsciously seek what Jung called participation mystique, a psychological fusion where they exist through others' responses to them. When these two archetypes meet, they create what systems therapists call a trauma bond. Not love, but a compulsive reenactment of childhood wounds. The empath recreates the experience of loving someone who cannot love back, while the narcissist recreates the experience of being the center of someone's universe. Understanding this deeper layer helps explain why surface-level advice like just leave or set boundaries often fails. The unconscious patterns run deeper than conscious choice. True healing requires what Jung called making the unconscious conscious, bringing these hidden motivations into the light of awareness. The empath must confront a painful truth: their endless giving often serves their own psychological needs as much as it serves others. There's an unconscious bargain at play. If I sacrifice enough, surely I'll be loved. This revelation can be devastating because it challenges their core identity as a selfless person. But it's also liberating because it reveals that their worth was never dependent on their utility to others. In Jungian psychology, the shadow contains not only negative traits we've rejected, but also positive qualities we've disowned. For empaths, the shadow often holds their power, their anger, their discernment, all banished because they were taught these qualities were unspiritual or unloving. But what if anger is actually love in motion? What if it's the part of you that says, "This treatment of someone I care about is unacceptable"? And what if that someone is you? Healthy anger is not rage or cruelty. It's the energy that moves us to protect what we value. When you reclaim this energy, you're not becoming mean, you're becoming whole. Your discernment, that ability to distinguish between people who nourish your soul and those who deplete it, isn't judgment in the spiritual sense. It's wisdom. It's the recognition that your energy is sacred and finite, and you have the right to direct it consciously. Your power, that capacity to influence your environment, to make choices to say yes and no with equal conviction, isn't domination. It's sovereignty. It's stepping into your role as the author of your own life story, rather than remaining a supporting character in everyone else's drama. When these shadow gifts return to consciousness, they don't replace your compassion. They complete it. You become capable of what spiritual teacher Pema Chodron calls fierce compassion. Love that is willing to say difficult truths. Love that refuses to enable destruction. Love that knows when to withdraw in order to serve the highest good. Modern neuroscience supports Jung's insights about psychological integration. When empaths begin setting boundaries and reclaiming their power, they're literally rewiring their nervous systems. The patterns of hypervigilance, people-pleasing, and self-abandonment are encoded in neural pathways strengthened by repetition. Each time you choose silence over reactive explanation, you're weakening the neural pathway that says, "I must defend myself to exist." Each time you choose withdrawal over pursuit, you're weakening the pathway that says, "I must chase approval to be worthy." Each time you choose no over automatic compliance, you're weakening the pathway that says, "Others' needs matter more than mine." Simultaneously, you're strengthening new pathways of self-trust, self-respect, and authentic connection. The brain's neuroplasticity means these new patterns can become as automatic as the old ones given time and repetition. This neurological shift often produces what feels like an identity crisis. Who are you if you're not the one who always gives? What's your value if you're not constantly proving it through service? These questions can trigger intense anxiety because they challenge the very foundation of how you've defined yourself. But this dissolution of false identity is necessary for authentic identity to emerge. Like a butterfly dissolving in the chrysalis, the old self must break down for the new self to be born. Jung called this process nigredo, the dark night of the soul that precedes rebirth. Your transformation extends beyond your immediate relationships. When you break free from codependent patterns, you're often healing wounds that stretch back generations. Many empaths carry what psychologists call generational trauma, unconscious patterns passed down through family lines. Perhaps your grandmother learned to survive by making herself indispensable. Perhaps your mother learned that love means suffering. Perhaps these patterns shaped the very air you breathed, growing up teaching you that your worth was conditional on your usefulness to others. When you step into wholeness, you're not just healing yourself. You're breaking chains that have bound your lineage. You're modeling for your children, your siblings, your community what healthy relationships actually look like. You're demonstrating that it's possible to love deeply without losing yourself to be kind, without being depleted to care, without sacrificing your well-being. This ripple effect often brings unexpected challenges. Family members who benefited from your endless giving may resist your transformation. Friends who relied on your constant availability may withdraw. Some relationships may not survive your awakening to wholeness. This loss can be profound and painful, yet it's also necessary. As you align with your authentic self, you naturally attract people who can meet you at that level of consciousness. The relationships you lose were often based on dysfunction. The ones you gain are rooted in mutual respect and genuine care. Carl Jung empath integration isn't a destination, but a daily practice. Even after the initial breakthrough, you'll face ongoing invitations to return to old patterns. Moments of stress, conflict, or uncertainty may trigger the familiar urge to overgive, to abandon your boundaries, to lose yourself in others' needs. This isn't failure. It's the natural process of growth. Each time you notice the old pattern arising and choose differently, you're strengthening your new way of being. Each time you catch yourself slipping into people-pleasing and gently redirect toward authenticity, you're practicing sovereignty. The key is developing what mindfulness teachers call the pause, that moment between stimulus and response where choice lives. When someone makes an unreasonable demand, instead of immediately saying yes, you pause. When conflict arises, instead of rushing to fix it, you pause. When guilt arises about taking care of yourself, you pause. In that pause, you can ask, what would honor both my compassion and my well-being? What response would come from wholeness rather than woundedness? What would love with boundaries look like here? These questions become your compass, guiding you toward responses that serve the highest good, including your own. Personal development of this depth requires patience with yourself. There will be days when you handle situations with grace and wisdom, and days when you revert to old patterns. Both are part of the journey. The goal isn't perfection, but integration, bringing all parts of yourself into conscious relationship with each other. As you embody this integration more fully, you may discover that your capacity to serve others actually increases, but from a completely different foundation. Instead of serving from emptiness, trying to fill an inner void through external validation, you serve from fullness, offering your gifts freely without attachment to outcome. This shift transforms the very nature of your compassion. No longer driven by unconscious needs to rescue or be needed, your empathy becomes clean, clear, powerful. You can hold space for others' pain without taking it on as your own. You can offer support without becoming enmeshed in others' drama. You can love without losing yourself. This is what Jung meant by individuation serving not just personal healing, but collective evolution. When you become whole, you naturally contribute to the healing of the whole. Your integrated presence becomes medicine for a world struggling with the same splits between light and shadow self, and other love and power. People sense this integration in your presence. There's a quality of groundedness, of authentic strength, of compassionate power that draws others toward their own wholeness. You become what Jung called a wounded healer in the truest sense. Someone whose integration of their own wounds allows them to facilitate healing in others. This is perhaps the deepest gift of this transformation, discovering that your sensitivity, when balanced with strength, becomes a superpower. Your ability to feel deeply when protected by boundaries becomes wisdom. Your capacity to love when grounded in self-respect becomes a force for genuine transformation in the world. What does daily life look like for the integrated empath? It's both simpler and more complex than the old way of being. Simpler because you're no longer constantly monitoring others' moods and adjusting yourself accordingly. More complex because you're now navigating relationships from a place of conscious choice rather than unconscious reaction. You wake up feeling centered in your own energy rather than immediately attuning to everyone else's needs. You make decisions based on your own inner knowing rather than what you think will keep others comfortable. You engage in relationships with genuine interest rather than the desperate need to be liked or needed. When conflicts arise, and they will, you meet them with both compassion and strength. You listen deeply, but don't automatically absorb others' emotions. You respond thoughtfully rather than react defensively. You're willing to disappoint others when necessary to remain true to yourself. Your no becomes as sacred as your yes, each offered from the same place of conscious choice. You give your time, energy, and attention intentionally rather than compulsively. You receive gracefully, understanding that allowing others to give to you is also a form of love. Perhaps most importantly, you develop what we might call emotional sovereignty, the ability to be fully present with others while remaining fully present with yourself. This is the integration that personal development aims toward, not the absence of feeling, but the conscious choice of how to respond to what you feel. This integrated way of being ripples out into every area of life. Your work becomes more authentic as you align with your genuine gifts and interests. Your friendships deepen as you show up more authentically. Your romantic relationships become partnerships of equals rather than caretaking arrangements. You discover that wholeness isn't selfish. It's the greatest gift you can offer the world. When you stop abandoning yourself, you stop teaching others to abandon you. When you honor your own needs, you model for others that their needs matter too. When you love yourself fiercely, you give others permission to love themselves as well. This is the ultimate transformation from fragmented giving that depletes to integrated loving, that nourishes from unconscious reaction to conscious response, from survival to authentic thriving. This is what it means to embody the fullness of human potential. Not despite your sensitivity, but because of it. Your journey from wounded empath to integrated being becomes a beacon of hope for everyone still struggling to find their way home to themselves. In healing your own split between light and shadow, you help heal the world's split between love and power. In integrating your own wholeness, you contribute to the possibility of wholeness for all. One of the most challenging aspects of this transformation involves understanding when love actually requires distance. The empath's conditioning tells them that love means availability, that caring means proximity, that if you truly love someone, you'll endure whatever they dish out. But mature love recognizes that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step away. This paradox reveals itself in multiple dimensions. Sometimes you must withdraw your energy so the other person can experience the natural consequences of their behavior. When you constantly cushion them from the impact of their choices, you rob them of the opportunity to learn and grow. Your endless rescuing becomes a form of enabling, keeping them trapped in patterns that ultimately harm both of you. There's also the reality that your own depletion serves no one. When you give from emptiness, your giving becomes contaminated with resentment, martyrdom, and unconscious expectations. The quality of what you offer degrades. Better to step back, refill your own cup, and offer what you can from a place of genuine abundance. Perhaps most importantly, maintaining boundaries teaches others how to treat you and how to treat themselves. When you accept disrespectful treatment, you're communicating that such treatment is acceptable. When you hold firm boundaries, you're modeling self-respect and inviting others to develop their own. This doesn't mean becoming cold or uncaring. It means developing what we might call detached compassion, the ability to care deeply while maintaining emotional equilibrium. You can love someone and refuse to enable their destructive patterns. You can hold space for their pain without absorbing it as your own. You can wish them well while protecting your own well-being. Jung understood that psychological healing isn't purely mental. It involves the entire being, including the body. Empaths often carry tremendous amounts of somatic tension from years of absorbing others' emotions and suppressing their own authentic responses. The body literally holds the memory of every time you swallowed your truth, every time you smiled when you wanted to scream, every time you said yes when everything in you was crying no. This embodied trauma manifests in various ways: chronic fatigue from constantly being on for others, digestive issues from swallowing, difficult emotions, headaches from overthinking relationship dynamics, back pain from carrying everyone's burdens. The body becomes a repository for all the unexpressed truths, unfelt feelings, and unmet needs. As you begin to integrate your shadow and establish boundaries, you may notice physical symptoms arising. This isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's evidence that long-suppressed energy is finally moving. The body is releasing what it has held on your behalf, creating space for new patterns of being. Supporting this somatic release requires gentle attention to your physical experience. Notice where you hold tension in your body. Breathe consciously into those areas. Move your body in ways that feel authentic and expressive. Allow yourself to feel whatever arises without immediately trying to fix or change it. Sometimes the body needs to shake, to cry, to rage, to collapse. Not from breakdown, but from breakthrough. These physical expressions of long-suppressed emotions are part of the integration process. They're your nervous system's way of discharging the accumulated stress of years of self-abandonment. As this somatic integration progresses, you'll likely notice changes in how you carry yourself. Your posture may become more upright as you stop carrying the weight of others' emotions. Your breathing may deepen as you release the chronic anxiety of people-pleasing. Your movements may become more fluid as you stop holding yourself so rigidly to avoid triggering others. The period of transformation often feels like wandering in the wilderness. Old relationships don't fit anymore, but new ones haven't fully formed. You're no longer the person people counted on to always say yes, always be available, always prioritize their needs. This shift can create a sense of profound loneliness as you navigate the gap between who you were and who you're becoming. Some relationships will naturally evolve to accommodate your growth. People who genuinely care about you will appreciate your increased authenticity, even if it requires adjustments in how you relate. They'll respect your boundaries and may even be inspired to establish their own. Other relationships may not survive your transformation. People who benefited from your codependent patterns may resist your changes, either openly through criticism and pressure, or subtly through manipulation and guilt-tripping. They may accuse you of being selfish, of changing in negative ways, of abandoning those who need you. These accusations can be particularly challenging because they target your deepest fears about yourself. Part of you may wonder if they're right. Are you becoming selfish? Are you letting people down? Are you losing your compassion? This is where your developing discernment becomes crucial. You must learn to distinguish between healthy guilt, which alerts you when you've actually done something harmful and manipulative, guilt, which others use to control your behavior. Healthy guilt leads to appropriate amends and changed behavior. Manipulative guilt keeps you trapped in patterns that serve others at your expense. During this wilderness period, it's essential to seek support from people who understand and encourage your growth. This might include therapists, spiritual advisors, support groups, or friends who have walked similar paths. You need witnesses to your transformation who can reflect back your progress when you're too close to see it clearly. Remember that this period of relationship upheaval, while painful, is necessary. You're shedding connections based on dysfunction and creating space for relationships built on health. The temporary loneliness is the price of authentic connection. As you integrate your shadow and develop stronger boundaries, one of the most valuable gifts that emerges is discernment. The ability to read the energy behind people's words and actions. This isn't about judging others, but about protecting your own energy and making conscious choices about how you engage. You begin to notice the difference between someone who apologizes from genuine remorse and someone who apologizes to manipulate you back into compliance. You can sense when someone's kindness has strings attached versus when it flows freely. You recognize the energy of someone who wants to grow and change versus someone who just wants you to stop requiring them to change. This discernment extends to recognizing your own patterns as well. You become aware of when you're giving from genuine abundance versus when you're giving from fear or obligation. You notice when your yes comes from authentic desire versus when it comes from people-pleasing programming. Carl Jung empath development includes learning to trust these subtle, energetic impressions. Jung wrote extensively about intuition as a valid way of knowing, particularly for individuals with strong empathic abilities. Your sensitivity becomes a guidance system helping you navigate relationships with wisdom. This doesn't mean becoming cynical or closed-hearted. It means becoming wise-hearted, able to love, and give generously while maintaining clear awareness of the dynamics at play. You can still be compassionate towards someone while recognizing that they're not in a place to receive your energy in healthy ways. As you move beyond the old patterns, you have the opportunity to consciously create new ways of relating. This involves developing what we might call relationship architecture. Clear structures that support both intimacy and autonomy, connection and sovereignty. This new architecture includes several key elements. Emotional responsibility. Each person takes responsibility for their own emotional experience, rather than making others responsible for their feelings or taking responsibility for others' feelings. You can care about someone's pain without making it your job to fix it. Reciprocity. Healthy relationships involve a natural flow of giving and receiving. While the balance doesn't need to be perfectly equal at every moment over time, there should be mutual support and contribution. Authentic communication. Rather than saying what you think others want to hear, you practice expressing your truth with kindness. This includes sharing your needs, preferences, boundaries, and feelings honestly. Respect for autonomy. You honor both your own and others' right to make choices, even when you disagree with those choices. You can offer support and perspective without trying to control outcomes. Healthy conflict. Rather than avoiding conflict or engaging in destructive fighting, you learn to navigate disagreements with respect and commitment to resolution. These new patterns may feel awkward at first, especially if you're used to more enmeshed ways of relating. But with practice, They become natural, creating relationships that nourish rather than drain everyone involved. Many empaths are drawn to spiritual practices and may wonder how shadow integration relates to their spiritual path. In fact, integrating the shadow is profoundly spiritual work. It's about becoming whole, which is the root meaning of the word holy. Many spiritual traditions unfortunately promote the same light-shadow split that creates problems for empaths. They emphasize qualities like forgiveness, compassion, and selflessness, while pathologizing anger boundaries and self-care as unspiritual. This creates spiritual bypassing, using spiritual concepts to avoid dealing with psychological wounds. True spirituality includes the whole self. The divine feminine includes both the nurturing mother and the fierce protector. The Christ energy includes both turning the other cheek and overturning the tables of the money changers. The Buddha taught both compassion and right action, which sometimes requires firm boundaries. Integrating your shadow isn't moving away from spirituality. It's moving towards spiritual maturity. It's recognizing that you can't truly love others if you're abandoning yourself. It's understanding that healthy boundaries are an expression of sacred self-care. It's seeing that your sensitivity is a spiritual gift that requires conscious stewardship. Personal development from this perspective becomes spiritual practice. Each time you choose authenticity over people-pleasing, you're choosing truth over illusion. Each time you set a boundary, you're honoring the sacredness of your energy. Each time you integrate another aspect of your shadow, you're becoming more whole. This perspective can transform your relationship with the more challenging aspects of your journey. The anger you've suppressed becomes sacred fire that can fuel right action. The selfishness you feared becomes healthy self-love that enables you to love others more purely. The power you've rejected becomes spiritual authority that serves the highest good. As this integration deepens, you discover that you're not just changing how you relate to difficult people. You're changing how you relate to life itself. You move through the world with a different quality of presence, one that invites respect and authentic connection. You no longer apologize for taking up space or having needs. You don't minimize your gifts or hide your light to make others comfortable. You speak your truth with both kindness and conviction. You give generously when it feels aligned and say no without guilt when it doesn't. This integrated way of being becomes contagious. People around you begin to feel permission to be more authentic themselves. Your modeling of healthy boundaries inspires others to examine their own. Your demonstration that sensitivity and strength can coexist challenges others' assumptions about what it means to be empathic. You become what Jung called an agent of individuation. Someone whose own wholeness supports others in their journey toward wholeness. Not through preaching or teaching, but simply through being fully yourself. This is perhaps the deepest healing available to empaths, discovering that your sensitivity, when balanced with strength, becomes a gift to the world. Your ability to feel deeply when protected by boundaries becomes wisdom. Your capacity to love when grounded in self-respect becomes a transformative force. You realize that the world doesn't need more martyrs or people-pleasers. What it needs is more individuals who are whole, integrated, and authentic. It needs people who can love fiercely without losing themselves, who can serve powerfully without depleting themselves, who can shine brightly without dimming others. This is your gift to offer, not your endless giving, but your wholeness. Not your willingness to absorb others' pain, but your capacity to hold space for healing. Not your sacrifice, but your integration. In becoming whole, you give everyone around you permission to become whole as well. And in that collective healing, the world itself begins to heal.